Okay, this morning I'll be reading the Left Behind series. I'm going to be reading book 2, and we are in chapter 14, and I will begin to read now. Buck Williams was crashing in all his journalistic chips. After trying to sleep off jet lag in the King David Hotel on Saturday, he had left messages for Chaim Rosenzweig, Mark Feinberg, and even Peter Matthews. According to Steve Plank, Nikolai Carpathia had turned down flat Buck's request for help in getting near the two preachers at the Wailing Wall. I told you, Steve said. He thinks those guys are nuts, and he's disappointed you think they're worth a story. So he doesn't know anybody who can get me in there? It's a restricted area. Precisely my point. Have we finally found something Nikolai the Great can't do? Steve had been angry. You know as well as I do that he could buy the Wailing Wall. But you're not going to get close to the place with his help. He doesn't want you there, Buck. For once in your life, get a clue and stay away. Yeah, that sounds like me. Buck, let me ask you something. If you defy Carpathia and then either turn down his offer or make him so irritated that he withdraws it, where are you going to work? I'll work. Where? Can't you see that his influence reaches everywhere? People love him. They'll do anything for him. People come away from meetings with him doing things they never would have dreamed they'd do. Tell me about it, Buck thought. I've got work to do, Buck said. Thanks anyway. Right now, you've got work to do, but nothing is permanent. Steve had never spoken truer words, though he didn't know it. Buck's second strikeout was with Peter Matthews. He was ensconced in a penthouse suite in a five-star hotel in Tel Aviv, and though he did take Buck's call, he was dismissive. I admire you, Williams, he said, but I think I've given you all the best stuff I know, on and off the record. I don't have any connection with the guys at the wall, but I'll give you a quote if that's what you want. What I want is to find someone who can get me close enough so I can talk to these two men myself. If they want to kill me or burn me up or ignore me, that'll be their prerogative. I am allowed close to the Wailing Wall because of my position, but I'm not interested in helping you get there. I'm sorry. On the record, I think these are two elderly Torah students who are pretending to be Moses and Elijah reincarnated. Their costumes are bad, their preaching is worse. Why people have died trying to hurt them, I have no idea. Maybe these two old coots have compatriots hidden hidden among the masses who pick people off who look like threats. Now, I've got to go. You'll be at the signing Monday? That's why I'm here, sir. I'll see you there. Do yourself a favor and don't tarnish your reputation by making a story out of those two. If you want a story, you ought to tag along with me this afternoon as I tour possible sites of Vatican involvement in Jerusalem. But, sir, what do you make of the fact that it hasn't rained in Jerusalem since these two began preaching? I don't make anything of it, except maybe that not even the clouds want to hear what they have to say. It hardly ever rains here anyway. Rayford had met the crew of Global Community One just a couple of hours before takeoff. Not one had ever worked from Pan Continental. In a brief pep talk, he had emphasized that safety was paramount. That is why every one of us is here. Proper procedure and protocol come next. We do everything by the book and we keep our logs and checklists as we go. We look sharp, we stay in the background, we serve our hosts and passengers. While we are deferential to the dignitaries and serve them, their safety is our primary concern. The best airplane crew is an invisible one. People feel comfort and security when they see uniforms and service, not individuals. Rayford's first officer was older than Rayford and probably had wanted the pilot's position. But he was friendly and efficient. The navigator was a young man Rayford would not have chosen, but he did his job. The cabin crew had worked together on Air Force One and seemed overly impressed with the new plane. But Rayford couldn't fault them for that. It was a technical marvel, but they would soon get used to it and take it for granted. Flying the 777 was, as Rayford had commented to the certifying examiner in Dallas, like sitting behind the wheel of a Jaguar. But the excitement wore off as the flight stretched on. After a while, he left the plane in the control of his first officer and slipped into his own living quarters. He stretched out on the bed and was suddenly struck by how utterly lonely he was. How proud Irene would have been of this moment when he had the top job in the flying world. But to him it meant little, though he felt in his spirit that he was doing what God had led him to do. Why, he had no idea, but deep inside Rayford felt sure he had flown his last route for Pancom. He phoned Chloe and woke her. "Sorry, Chloe," he said. "That's all right, Dad. Is it exciting?" "Oh, yeah, I can't deny that." They had discussed that the plane-to-ground communications were likely under surveillance, so there would be no disparaging talk about Carpathia or anyone else in his orbit, and they would not mention Buck by name. "Who do you know there?" "Only Hattie, really. I'm kind of lonely." "Me too. I haven't heard from anyone else yet. I'm supposed to get a call early Monday morning, your time. When will you be in Jerusalem?" "In about 3 hours we land in Tel Aviv and are transported by luxury motor coaches to Jerusalem." "You aren't flying into Jerusalem?" "No, a 777 can't land there. Tel Aviv is only 35 miles from Jerusalem." "When will you be home?" "Well, we were scheduled to leave Tel Aviv Tuesday morning, but now they tell us that we'll be flying on to Baghdad Monday afternoon and we'll leave from there Tuesday morning. It adds 600 air miles, about another hour to the total trip." "What's in Baghdad?" "The only airport near Babylon that will take a plane this size. Carpathia wants to tour Babylon and show his people the plans." "Will you go along?" "I imagine I will. It's been about 50 miles south of Baghdad by bus. If I take this job, I imagine I'll be seeing a lot of the Middle East over the next few years." "I miss you already. I wish I could be there." "I know who you miss, Chloe. I miss you too, Dad. I'll be chopped liver to you within a month. I can see where you and what's his name are going." Bruce phoned. He said he got a strange call from some woman named Amanda White claiming to have known Mom. She told Bruce she met Mom at one of the church's home Bible study groups and only just remembered her name. She said it came to her because she knew it sounded like iron and steel. "Huh," Rayford said. "Irene Steele. Guess I never thought of it that way. What did she want?" "She said she finally became a Christian, mostly because of remembering things Mom said at the Bible study, and now she's looking for a church. She wondered if New Hope was still up and running." "Where's she been?" "Grieving her husband and two grown daughters. She lost them in the rapture." "Your mom was that instrumental in her life, and yet she didn't remember her name?" "Go figure," Chloe said. Buck napped for about an hour and a half before taking a call from Chaim Rosenzweig, who had just gotten in. "Even I will need to adjust to the time difference, Cameron," Dr. Rosenzweig said. "No matter how many times I make the trip, the jet lag attacks. How long have you been in the country?" "I arrived yesterday morning. I need your help." Buck told Rosenzweig he needed to get closer to the Wailing Wall. "I tried," he said, "but I probably didn't get within 100 yards. The two men were preaching, and the crowds were much bigger than I ever saw on CNN." "Oh, there are bigger crowds now as we get closer to the signing of the covenant?" "Perhaps in light of the signing, the pair have stepped up their activities. More and more people are coming to hear them, and apparently they are even seeing Orthodox Jews converting to Christianity. Very strange." Nikolai asked about them on the way over and watched some of the coverage on television. He was as angry as I've ever seen him. "What did he say?" "That was just it. He said nothing. I thought he looked flushed and his jaw was set. I know him just a little, you understand, and I can tell when he is agitated." "Chaim, I need your help." "Cameron, I am not Orthodox. I do not go to the wall, and even if I could, I would probably not risk the danger. I don't recommend that you do either." The bigger story here is covenant signing Monday morning. Nikolai and the Israeli delegation and I finalized everything in New York Friday. Nikolai was brilliant. He is amazing, Camera. I long for the day when we both are working for him. Shane, please. I know every journalist in the world would love to have an exclusive with the two preachers, but I am the one who will not give up until I get it or die trying. That's just what you might do. Doctor, I've never asked you for anything but your time, and you've always been most generous. I don't know what I can do for you, Cameron. I would take you there myself if I thought I could get in, but you will not be able to get in anyway. But you must know someone with access. Of course I do. I know many Orthodox Jews, many rabbis, but what, what about Ben Judah? Oh, Cameron, he is so busy. His live report on the research project will be broadcast Monday afternoon. He must be cramming like a schoolboy before a final examination. But maybe not, Shane. Maybe he has done so much research that he could talk about this for an hour without notes. Maybe he's ready now and is looking for something to occupy him so he doesn't over prepare or stress out, waiting for his big moment. There was silence on the other end, and Buck prayed Rosenzweig would yield. I don't know, Cameron. I would not want to be bothered so close to a big moment. Would you do this, Shane? Just call and wish him the best and feel him out about his schedule this weekend. I'll come anywhere at any time if he can get me close to the wall. Only if he is looking for a diversion, Rosenzweig said. If I sense he is buried in his work, I won't even broach the subject. Thank you, sir. You'll call me back? Either way, and Cameron, please don't get your hopes up. And don't hold it against me if he is unavailable. I would never do that. I know, but I also sense how important this is to you. Buck was dead to the world and had no idea how long his phone had been ringing. He sat straight up in the bed and noticed the Sunday afternoon sun turning orange, the stream of light making a weird pattern on the bed. Buck caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror as he reached for the phone. His cheek was red and creased, his eyes puffy and half open, his hair shooting out in all directions. His mouth tasted horrible, and he had slept in his clothes. Hello? Estes Tamaron Williams? Came the thick Hebrew accent. Yes, sir. This is Dr. Tosan Ben Judah. Buck jumped to his feet as if the respected scholar was in the room. Yes, Dr. Ben Judah. A privilege to hear from you, sir. Thank you, the doctor managed. I am calling you from out front of your hotel. Buck fought to understand him. Yes? I have a car and a driver. A car and a driver, yes, sir. Are you ready to go? To go. To the wall. Oh, yes, sir. I mean, no, sir. I'm going to need 10 minutes. Can you wait 10 minutes? I should have called before arriving. I was under the impression from our mutual friend that this was a matter of some urgency to you. Buck ran the strange sounding English through his mind again. A matter of urgency, yes. Just give me 10 minutes. Thank you, sir. Buck tore off his clothes and jumped in the shower. He didn't give the water time to heat. He lathered up and rinsed off, then dragged his razor across his face. He didn't take the time to find the electrical adapter for his hairdryer, but just yanked a towel off the rack and attacked his long hair, feeling as if he was pulling half of it out of his scalp. He jerked the comb through his hair and brushed his teeth. What did one wear to the Wailing Wall? He knew he wouldn't be getting inside, but would he offend his host if he was not wearing a coat and tie? He hadn't brought one. He hadn't planned on dressing up even for the treaty signing the next morning. Buck chose his usual button-up shirt, dressy jeans, ankle-high boots, and leather jacket. He dropped his MP3 recorder and camera into his smallest leather bag and ran down 3 flights of steps. When he burst from the door, he stopped. He had forgotten his cell and had no idea what the rabbi looked like. Would he look like Rosenzweig or Feinberg or neither? Neither, it turned out. Tyson Ben Judah, in a black suit and black felt hat, stepped from the front passenger seat of an idling white Mercedes and waved shyly. Buck hurried to him. Dr. Ben Judah, he said, shaking his hand. The man was middle-aged, trim, and youthful, with strong, angular features and only a hint of gray in his dark brown hair. In his labored English, the rabbi said, In your dialect, my first name sounds like city, Zion. You may call me that, Zion. Are you sure? Sure of my own name? The rabbi smiled. I am sure. No, I meant, are you sure I can call you? I know what you meant, Mr. Williams. You may call me Zion. To Buck, Zion didn't sound too much different from Zion in Dr. Ben Judah's accent. Please call me Buck. Buck. The rabbi held open the front door as Buck slid in next to the driver. It's a nickname. All right, Buck. The driver understands no English. Buck turned to see the driver with his hand extended. Buck shook it, and the man said something totally unintelligible. Buck merely smiled and nodded. Dr. Ben Judah spoke to the driver in Hebrew, and they pulled away. Now, Buck, the rabbi said as Buck turned in his seat to face him, Dr. Rosenzweig said you wanted access to the Wailing Wall, which you understand is impossible. I can get you close enough to the two witnesses that you can get their attention if you dare. The two witnesses, you call them the two witnesses? That's what my friends and I. Dr. Ben Judah held up both hands and turned his head away as if to indicate that was a question he would not answer or comment on. The question is, do you dare? I dare. And you will not hold me personally responsible for anything that might happen to you. Of course not, but I would like to interview you too. The hands came up yet again. I made quite clear to the press and to Dr. Rosenzweig that I am not granting any interviews. Just some personal information then. I won't ask about your research because I am sure after boiling down 3 years into a 1-hour presentation, you'll explain your conclusions fully tomorrow afternoon. Precisely. As for personal information, I am 44 years old. I grew up in Haifa, the son of an Orthodox rabbi. I have 2 doctorates, one in Jewish history and one in ancient languages. I have studied and taught my whole life and consider myself more of a scholar and historian than an educator, though my students have been most kind in their evaluations. I think and pray and read mostly in Hebrew, and I am embarrassed to speak English so poorly, especially in an egalitarian country like this. I know English grammar and syntax better than most Englishmen, and certainly most Americans. Present company accepted, I'm sure. But I have never had the time to practice, let alone perfect, my dictation. I married only 6 years ago and have 2 teenage stepchildren, a boy and a girl. A little over 3 years ago, I was commissioned by a state agency to conduct an exhaustive study of the Masonic passages so the Jews would recognize Messiah when he comes. This has been the most rewarding work of my life. In the process, I added Greek and Aramaic to the list of my mastered languages, which now number 22. I am excited about the completion of the work and eager to share my findings with the world by television. I don't pretend that the program will compete with anything containing sex, violence, or humor, but I expect it will be controversial nonetheless. I don't know what else to ask, Buck admitted. Then we can be done with the interview and get on with the business at hand. I am curious about your taking time to do this. Dr. Rosenzweig is a mentor, one of my most beloved colleagues. A friend of his is a friend of mine. Thank you. I admire your work. I read the articles about Dr. Rosenzweig that you have done, and many others too. Besides, the men at the wall intrigue me as well. Perhaps with my language proficiency, we will be able to communicate with them. So far, all I've seen them do is communicate with the masses who assemble. They speak to people who threaten them, but otherwise I know of no individual who has spoken with them. The Mercedes parked near some tour buses, and the driver waited as Dr. Ben Judah and Buck mounted a set of stairs to take in the view of the Wailing Wall, the Temple Mount, and everything in between. These are the largest crowds I've seen, the rabbi said. But they are so quiet, Buck whispered. The 2 preachers do not use microphones. Dr. Ben Judah explained. People make noise at their own peril. So many want to hear what the men have to say that others threaten those who cause any distraction. Do the 2 ever take a break? Yes, they do. Occasionally, one will move around the side of that little building there and lie on the ground near the fence. They will often trade off resting and speaking. The men who were consumed by fire recently actually tried to attack them there from outside the fence when they both rested. That is why no one approaches them there. That might be my best opportunity, Buck said. That was my thinking. You will go with me? Only if we make it plain we mean them no harm. They have killed at least 6 and have threatened many more. A friend of mine stood on this very spot the day they burned up 4 attackers, and he swears the fire came from their mouths. Do you believe that? I have no reason to doubt my friend, though he was several hundred feet away. Is there a better time than another to approach, or should we just play that by ear? I propose we join the crowds first. They descended the stairs and moved toward the wall. Buck was impressed that the crowd seemed so reverential. Within 40 or 50 feet of the preachers were Orthodox rabbis, bowing, praying, sliding written prayers into the cracks between the stones in the wall. Occasionally, one of the rabbis would turn toward the witnesses and shake his fist, crying out in Hebrew, only to be shushed by the crowd. Sometimes one of the preachers would respond directly. As Buck and Dr. Ben Judah reached the edge of the crowd, a rabbi at the wall fell to his knees, his eyes towards heaven, and howled out a prayer in anguish. Silence, shouted one of the preachers, and the rabbi wept bitterly. The preacher turned to the crowd. He beseeches Almighty God to strike us dead for blaspheming his name. But he is as the Pharisees of old. He does not recognize the one who was God and is God and shall be God now and for more. We come to bring witness to the Godship of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. With that, the crying rabbi prostrated himself and hid his face, rocking in humiliation at the wickedness of what he heard. Dr. Ben Judah whispered to Buck, would you like me to translate? Translate what? The prayer of the rabbi. And the response of the preacher. I understood the preacher. Dr. Ben Judah looked puzzled. If I had known you were fluent in Hebrew, it would have been much easier for me to communicate with you. I'm not. I didn't understand the prayer, but the preacher spoke to the crowd in English. Ben Judah shook his head. My mistake, he said. Sometimes I forget what language I'm in. But there, right now, he's speaking in Hebrew again. He's saying, Sir, sorry to interrupt, but he is speaking in English. There's a Hebraic accent, but he is saying, and now unto him who is able to keep you from falling. You understand that? Of course. The rabbi looked shaken. Buck, he whispered anonymously, he is speaking in Hebrew. Buck turned and stared at the 2 witnesses. They took turns speaking sentence by sentence. Buck understood every word in English. Ben Judah touched him lightly, and he followed the rabbi deeper into the crowd. English? Ben Judah asked a Hispanic-looking man who stood with a woman and 3 teenagers. Espanol, the man responded apologetically. Dr. Ben Judah immediately began conversing with him in Spanish. The man kept nodding and answering in the affirmative. The rabbi thanked him and moved on. He found a Norwegian and spoke to him in his native tongue. Then some Asians. He grabbed Buck's arms tight and pulled him away from the crowd and closer to the preachers. They stopped about 30 feet from the 2 men, separated by a fence of wrought iron bars. These people are hearing the preacher in their own languages, Ben Judah shuddered. Truly, this is of God. Are you sure? No question. I hear them in Hebrew. You hear them in English. The family from Mexico knows only a little English, but no Hebrew. The man from Norway knows some German and some English, but no Hebrew. He hears them in Norwegian. Oh God, the rabbi added, and Buck knew it was out of reverence. He was afraid Ben Judah might collapse. A young man wearing boots, khaki slacks, and a white t-shirt came screaming through the crowd. People fell to the ground when they saw his automatic weapon. He wore a gold necklace and his black hair and beard were unkempt. His dark eyes were ablaze as he rattled off a few rounds into the air, which cleared a path for him directly to the preachers. He shouted something in an Eastern dialect Buck did not understand, but as he lay on the pavement peeking out from under his arms, Rabbi Ben Judah whispered, he says he's on a mission from Allah. Buck reached into his bag and turned on the recorder as the man ran to the front of the crowd. The two witnesses stopped preaching and stood shoulder to shoulder, glaring at the gunman as he approached. He ran full speed, firing as he ran, but the preacher stood rock solid, not speaking, not moving, arms crossed over their ragged robes. When the young man got to within 5 feet of them, he seemed to hit an invisible wall. He recoiled and flipped over backward, his weapon clattering away. His head smacked the ground first, and he lay groaning. Suddenly one of the preachers shouted, "You are forbidden to come nigh to the servants of the Most High God. We are under his protection until the due time. And woe to anyone who approaches without the covering of Yahweh himself." And as he finished, the other breathed from his mouth a column of fire that incinerated the man's clothes, consumed his flesh and organs, and in seconds left a charred skeleton smoking on the ground. The weapon melted and was fused to the cement, and the man's molten necklace dripped gold through the cavity in his chest. Buck lay on his stomach, his mouth agape, his hand on the back of the rabbi, who shuddered uncontrollably. In the distance, families ran screaming toward their cars and buses while Israeli soldiers approached the wall slowly, weapons at the ready. One of the preachers spoke. "No one need fear us who come to listen to our testimony to the living God. Many have believed and received our report. Only those who seek to do us harm shall die. Fear not." Buck believed him. He wasn't sure the rabbi did. They stood and began to move away, but the eyes of the witnesses were on them. Israeli soldiers shouted at them from the edge of the plaza. "The soldiers are telling us to move away slowly," Dr. Ben Judah translated. "I want to stay," Buck said. "I want to talk to these men." "Did you not see what just happened?" "Of course, but I also heard them say they meant no harm, to sincere listeners." "But are you a sincere listener, or are you just a journalist looking for a scoop?" "I'm both," Buck admitted. "God bless you," the rabbi said. He turned and spoke in Hebrew to the two witnesses as Israeli soldiers shouted at him, and Buck all the more. Buck and Ben Judah backed away from the preachers, who now stood silent. "I told them we would meet them at 10 o'clock tonight behind the building, where they occasionally rest. Will you be able to join me?" "Like I would pass that up," Buck said. Rayford returned from a quiet dinner with part of his new crew to an urgent message from Chloe. It took him a few minutes to get through, wishing she had given him some indication of what was wrong. It wasn't like her to say something was urgent unless it really was. She picked up the phone on the first ring. "Hello," she said. "Buck? Dad? Yeah, what's up? How's Buck?" "I don't know. I haven't seen him yet." "Are you going to?" "Well, sure, I suppose. Do you know what hospital he's in?" "What? You didn't see it?" "See what?" "Dad, it was just on the morning news. The two witnesses at the Wailing Wall burned some guy to death, and everybody around hit the ground. One of the last two lying there was Buck." "Are you sure?" "No question. Do you know for certain he was hurt?" "No, I just assumed. He was just lying there next to a guy in a black suit whose hat had fallen off." "Where's he staying?" "At the King David. I left a message for him. They said they had his keys, so he was out." "What does that mean?" "Some people leave their keys at the desk whenever they go out. It doesn't mean anything special. I'm sure he'll call you. Isn't there some way you can find out if he was hurt?" "I'll try. Let's leave it that way. If I find out anything either way, I'll call you. No news will be good news, at least." Buck's knees felt like jelly. "Are you all right, Rabbi?" "I'm fine," Dr. Ben Judah said, "but I am nearly overcome. I know the feeling. I want to believe those men are of God." "I believe they are," Buck said. "Do you? Are you a student of the scriptures?" "Only recently." "Come, I want to show you something." When they got back to the car, the rabbi's driver stood with his door open, ashen-faced. Tyson Ben Judah spoke reassuringly to him in Hebrew, and the man kept looking past him to Buck. Buck tried to smile. Buck got into the front seat, and Ben Judah quietly guided the driver to park as close as possible to the Golden Gate at the east of the Temple Mount. He invited Buck to walk with him to the gate, so he could interpret the Hebrew graffiti. "See here," he said, "it says, 'Come Messiah,' and here, 'Deliver us,' and there, 'Come in triumph.' My people have longed for and prayed for and watched and waited for our Messiah for centuries, but much of Judaism even in the Holy Land, has become secular and less biblically oriented. My research project was assigned almost as an inevitability. People have lost sight of exactly what or whom they are looking for, and many have given up. And to show you how deep runs the animosity between the Muslim and the Jew, look at the cemetery the Muslims have built just outside the fence here. What's the significance? Jewish tradition says that in the end times, Messiah and Elijah will lead the Jews to the temple in triumph through the gate from the east. But Elijah is a priest, and walking through a graveyard would defile him. So the Muslims have put one here to make the triumphal entry impossible. Buck reached for his recorder and was going to ask the rabbi to repeat that tidbit of history, but he noticed it was still running. Look at this, Buck said. I got the attack on my digital. He rewound the machine to where they heard gunfire and screaming. Then the man fell and the weapon clattered. In his mind's eye, Buck recalled the blast of fire coming from the witness's mouth. On the recorder, it sounded like a strong gust of wind. More screaming. Then the preachers shouted loudly in a language Buck couldn't understand. That's Hebrew, Rabbi Ben Judah said. Surely you hear that. They spoke in Hebrew, Buck acknowledged, and the recorder picked it up in Hebrew. But I heard it in English, as sure as I'm standing here. You did say you heard them promise no harm to anyone who came only to listen to their testimony. I understood every word. The rabbi closed his eyes. The timing of this is very important to my presentation. Buck walked back to the car with him. I need to tell you something, he said. I believe your Messiah has already come. I know you do, young man. I will be interested to hear what the two preachers say when you tell them that. Rayford checked with Steve Kling to see if his people had heard any more about another death at the Wailing Wall. He didn't ask specifically about Buck, still not wanting to let on about their friendship. He heard all about it, Plank said angrily. The Secretary General believes that these two should be arrested and tried for murder. He doesn't understand why the Israeli military seems so impotent. Maybe they're afraid of being incinerated. What chance would these two have against a sniper with a high-powered weapon? You close the place down. Clear out the innocent bystanders and shoot those two dead. Use a grenade or even a missile if you have to. That's Carpathia's idea? Straight from the horse's mouth, Plank said, spoken like a true pacifist. And that will be the end of chapter 14, and next we'll be reading chapter 15. So thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day, and you're free to go.